Hello and welcome everybody. My name's Leanne Minshull. I'm the Strategy Director at the Australia Institute. And this is our first episode of our brand new Climate Academy series that we're going to be running from now until the election. And the series is going to look at all things climate and energy and nature and how these issues are rolling out during the election, what our evidence-based policy is showing, what are some of the barriers to communicating this in an election context, and what are the most persuasive arguments and the key messages. So at the end of the Climate Academy, if you're not already, you'll be expert enough and have the tools to go out and talk to people in your community around what are the issues that are really resonating for people. Just a little bit of housekeeping. You can type in questions for our panelists using the Q&A box, which is down the bottom of your screen. You can upvote questions. So when we get to the question time later on, I'll be able to tell what questions people really want to ask. And please keep things civil and on topic in the chat, or we'll boot you out. And this is a live event and it is being recorded. I'd also like to acknowledge that having just moved to Canberra, I'm now on the unceded territory of the Ngunnawal people, and I want to pay my respects to them and also recognise any other people or families with connections to the lands of the ACT and the region. So in this episode, I'm going to be joined by our Executive Director, Richard Dennis, and our Principal Advisor and gas expert, Mark Ogge. So I think, Richard, I might start with you first. We've been told that this election is first, second, third and fourth a cost of living election. But we seem to be getting a lot of traction, certainly on our channels, on nature laws and on climate and gas. What's happening?
Well, look, to be clear, there are lots of people who are worried about the cost of living. But what is the cost of living? The cost of living is just a sort of poorly defined, vague concept that bundles up the prices of all the things we pay for. And what's happened in the last couple of years in Australia is the prices of the stuff we buy has risen faster than our people's wages have gone up. And that's definitely putting a lot of pressure on a lot of household budgets. The Reserve Bank jacking up interest rates has contributed a lot to that as well. But when we break down the cost of living, what we're talking about is the cost of stuff. And the cost of stuff includes the cost of electricity, the cost of gas, the cost of insurance, the cost of food, the cost of all sorts of things. And guess what? Climate change is already today driving up the cost of a lot of those things. So while there are plenty of people in Parliament today who will do anything they can to avoid talking about climate change, which is why they're saying, don't look at that, look at this cost of living thing. They're not wrong to say that. Like all good spin, there's some truth to it. But saying don't talk about climate change, talk about cost of living is disingenuous in lots of ways, including that a very big part of cost of living increases is insurance prices going up, especially for houses. Why? Because we're having more expensive weather events more often. We know that's true. In Australia, we're paying a lot for energy. Why? Because we have bad energy policy, and even though we're an enormous exporter of gas, which is causing climate change, let's never forget that being the world's third largest fossil fuel exporter means we're exporting huge amounts of climate change that comes back to drive up our insurance. But we've got high energy prices because energy policy is crap. We've got high insurance costs because climate change is getting worse. And yeah, certainly parts of food and other things are getting more expensive because of climate change as well. So when a politician says, I don't want to talk about climate change, I'm just focused on cost of living, that's like Peter Dutton saying, I don't want to talk about climate change, I just want to talk about African crime gangs and how everybody's scared. The job of politicians is to tell us what the most important issue is, but the job in a democracy is for us to tell politicians what the most important issues to us are.
Thanks, Richard. We've done quite a lot of looking a little bit of analysis on what messages are resonating the most through our communications here at the Institute. And I'm going to share some of that later on. So if anyone on here is particularly interested in that, that's coming up. But one of the reasons why we asked Mark to come on was because last week was such a big week for gas. And Mark, it looks like, so I'm going to go to Mark next to talk about that. So Mark, it seems like we've got, with the gas reservation policy from the Liberals, we've got Dutton, we've got the Liberals, the Nationals, and the Greens all on a unity ticket saying that we don't have a supply problem, we've got an export problem. Can you take us a little bit through that?
Yeah, sure, Leanne. I think so. I think that the gas industry's power, the gas industry basically gets Australian politicians to do whatever they want. There's a long history of that in Australia, even when it's against our national interest. And the reason for that is that they've always they've convinced our elected representatives and a large amount of the population that they're essential to the economy for jobs and taxes and royalties and supplying power and those kinds of things. But that's shifting, and the reason it's shifting is that it's really all smoke and mirrors. None of it's true. They export 80% of our gas. They use more gas just running their export terminals than we use for electricity. They get most of that gas for free that they export. They don't pay any petroleum resource rent tax, which was the tax which has been around for 40 years, and they still haven't paid it. And they're price gouging us for our own gas. And people are starting to realise that, and what that has created is an opportunity for politicians to stand up to the gas industry. There's an incentive to stand up to them, and a disincentive to be seen as just doing what they're told by the gas industry. And I think that's starting to happen. The Greens have been saying it for a long time. Some of the other independents are saying it, and last week Peter Dutton said it, and what he said was that Australia doesn't have the problem isn't a lack of gas. It's that it's caused by export, and he said he would take some of the gas that these companies are exporting and selling on the lucrative global spot market, and meanwhile telling Australians that there's a gas shortage, right? So he's seen the opportunity and he's jumped in there, and I think, in fact, he's kind of left Labor a little bit flat-footed on this. But the other side to what Dutton is saying, and this is really important, so I think he's seen the opportunity, he's capitalising on that. But the other side of it is he's saying he's going to fast-track a whole bunch of enormous new gas projects. And so on the one hand, he's saying we don't need more gas because we just have to divert gas that would otherwise be exported to the spot market. And on the other hand, he's saying we're going to fast-track all these big gas projects. These gas projects are all for export. So what he's saying is he's going to allow the export of vast amounts more of Australia's gas, right? And so every year, these big multinational companies that export our gas are exporting gas that could have supplied Australia for 4 years, and they've been doing it for decades, right? So decades of supply of gas has been flowing overseas. And what Dutton is saying is that he's going to cut environmental regulations to allow them to export even more of our gas, even more gas that could have supplied us for decades to come.
Just before I go back to Richard, I've got a few comments on the chat that people can't hear me. So I'm going to throw over to Richard, and Angus is going to help me fix that. But Richard, could you explain what this means politically and why you think now that the ALP in a way is a bit of an outlier? And could people be doing things leading up to the election and afterwards? What should we be asking for, or what arguments do we take to the ALP?
Sure. Thanks, Leanne. And look, before I do that, let me just read a quote from Peter Dutton. So I agree with everything Mark just said. Here's Peter Dutton. Well, there's gas already, obviously. Gas is being exported, but it's not contracted to do so under the foundation contracts. And that's the point I'd make, full stop. We don't need to rely on new gas wells. There's gas there now. Let me just read that out again. We don't need to rely on new gas wells. There's gas there now, said Peter Dutton last week. And of course, he's right. Now, there's two parts to what Peter Dutton's saying. One is there's no gas shortage. We've got plenty of gas. This is 100% true. And then, having admitted that we don't need to build new gas, he said, but I'd like to build some new gas. Like, I feel like building some new gas. I'm the kind of guy who wants to have new gas, and that'll make the gas industry like me. So, vote Liberal if you want more gas. One of the reasons we're talking about this today is to make sure people hear that Dutton said two things, and you can agree with half of it and disagree with half of it. That's okay. It's a democracy. Our politicians don't have to be sensible. They don't have to be evidence-based. They don't have to listen to the science. They don't have to do anything. But these are the people who want to hold office. These are the people who want to make the laws. And for so long, at the Australia Institute, we've been saying there is no shortage of gas. And for so long, the gas industry and the Labor Party and the Liberal Party have said there is a shortage of gas. There is a shortage of gas. And because there's a shortage of gas, that's why we need to build new wells. Well, Peter Dutton just cut the Gordian knot for us and said there's two separate things. One is there a shortage of gas? No. The other is, should we build more new gas wells? Now, obviously, I'd say no. The science says no, it's not that great for the economy, blah, blah, blah. But I really think everyone needs to get their heads around the fact that while election, you have to choose which party you like the most, in election campaign, you don't have to 100% agree or 100% disagree with particular parties and particular policies. And I think it's liberating to hear the leader of one of Australia's major parties tell the truth. I feel really excited that one of the leaders of one of our political parties has said the quiet bit out loud. There isn't a shortage of gas. I just feel like building more gas wells. That's okay. He's allowed to do that. But don't ignore the importance of the first bit. There is no shortage of gas. So now to Leanne's question. See, I took a long run up, Leanne. So
thanks, Richard. I want to check to see if people can hear me now. I've just got a new microphone, so hopefully
you sound a lot better.
Okay, great. Keep going with the...
So what does this mean for Labor? What does it mean for the political campaign? Well, I don't know what it means for Labor. They might want to keep lying and tell people there's a shortage of gas. They might want to keep misleading people and saying that building the North West Shelf gas project in the far north of Western Australia is going to help Melbourne get through a particularly cold day on a particularly cold winter, even though there's no pipeline connecting the North West Shelf to Melbourne. Maybe Labor, maybe Madeleine King wants to come out and tell us again that we need lots more gas to 2050, and maybe Madeleine King again wants to pretend that the reason we need new gas projects in the northwest of Australia is because maybe there's not enough pipelines to get some gas from Brisbane to Melbourne on a really cold day. So is Labor going to keep misleading people? Is Labor going to keep suggesting that we need to expand gas production because there's a pipeline shortage in parts of Melbourne? Maybe. I don't know, but it's not true. It's never been true. They know it's not true. So will Labor actually feel this is an opportunity to jettison the nonsense they've been talking and think, all right, Dutton's freed us. Maybe as a country we can now stop this silly pretense that as one of the largest exporters of gas in the world, we've got a shortage. I hope Labor take that opportunity. Will they? Won't they? Don't know. But what does it mean going forward? Well, regardless of who wins the election, and I think a minority Labor government is by far the most likely outcome at the moment. Glad to see the bookmakers finally agree with me, but I think it's kind of been obvious for a while that that's most likely, which doesn't mean it's inevitable. Post-election, things can get really interesting now, because post-election, if, for example, we have an inquiry into does Australia have a shortage of gas, if we have an inquiry, a parliamentary inquiry post-election into whether we have a shortage of gas, we know that the Liberals will say no. We know that the Greens will say no. We know David Pocock will say no. We know Jackie Lambie will say no. What we don't know is what Madeleine King and the Labor Party will say. But I know what the science says. I know what the engineering says. I know what the accounting says. We don't have a shortage of gas. So that's important, because for so long, we've been told we have to continue to subsidise the expansion of new gas projects for export because Australia's got a shortage of gas. Well, some of that bullshit has now been stripped away.
And that would make this inquiry, if we got one up, a lot different to previous inquiries where we hadn't had this put on the record by one of the major parties, which would be a big difference.
A huge difference.
Would be a lot of fun, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Mark, you talk more than anyone in the Institute about gas to more people than anybody. What do you find? Do you find consistently themes coming up, or people asking the same questions, or something that people don't understand that once you've spoken them, talked them through it, they have a better understanding of what the gas industry really is doing in the country?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing that really shocks people is that 80% of the gas is exported. That's 90% in Western Australia and 70% on the East Coast. Like people are outraged by that, particularly because the gas industry always says, and the government always says, it's about keeping the lights on. So these companies use more gas just running their export terminals than Australians use for producing electricity or manufacturing or residential use. So people are shocked by that first up. And then when you tell them that on top of that, they get most of the gas for free, the Commonwealth government doesn't charge royalties on the majority of the gas exported for Australia, people are generally outraged. And then on top of that, when they hear that the gas industry isn't paying petroleum resource rent tax, a tax introduced 40 years ago specifically designed for the oil and gas industry, they're quite shocked by that. And I think people more and more are just coming to understand that, what they've been told for many, many years by governments and by the gas industry is nonsense. And really the gas industry is taking the piss.
Yeah, well, good line there. Albo's taken up our line on taking the piss through supermarket price gouging. For anyone who hasn't seen it, we launched an advertising campaign to promote our research about 3 or 4 weeks ago that says big gas is taking the piss, and it has got it's got a very good response, I'd say, Mark. We've got ads running and billboards up. But it's interesting thinking about the gas companies themselves and their advertising. So a lot of their advertising goes to people cooking, people standing around a barbecue. I mean, if I was just an average punter, I would actually think that, 80% of gas in Australia was used for our cooking or for residential use. Do you know what the actual percentage is that's used for residential use?
So it's about, I would say it's about, it would be about 5%. I would say, I'm just guessing there, but it's about a third of domestic use on the East Coast. Yeah, I'd say probably about 5% at the most.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's something that we can check up anyway, but it's definitely not the majority of the use, which is what you'd think it was if you just watch the gas ads alone that are allowed to be up in airports. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to put our ads up in the airports because all of them rejected them as being too political, but apparently the gas is fine. I am going to go through some of our stats on what's travelled with our messaging around gas and around climate in general, because people online, I'm sure, would have seen that last week salmon was also a very big story, and we had a massive amendment to the EPBC Act, and that was during a week when the budget was out. And I don't know about others, but at the Institute, we kind of had our traditional budget rollout week responses ready, and we had to pivot pretty quickly because it was clear when media started asking us for what our thoughts were on the EPBC Amendment Act and what our thoughts were on salmon, that this wasn't a normal budget week. And again, despite the fact that, yes, this is a cost of living election, environment and climate is dominating some of the media, certainly over the past 10 days. So I asked our comms people to have a look at what our social media was doing. Unsurprisingly, the best performing social media post for last week actually was the one that we had with Jackie Lambie, and that got to about nearly 1 million people. And it was across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Rex Patrick at our gas conference also went well. We had Mark at the press conference got 100,000 people engaging with that press conference. And to give you an idea of what that is like for what we normally get for social media at the Australia Institute, the next best, highest performing non-climate social media post was Richard talking about supermarket price gouging, and that was about 17,000 people.
So you don't have to make it into a competition, Leanne. I mean,
it is a competition, Richard.
Sure, like I like Mark as much as anyone, but come on.
Well, I think the other interesting thing as well, because this week we've been concentrating on the fact that, Peter Dutton has said we don't have a gas shortage, but the other fact that the gas industry and politicians quite often roll out is that Tokyo needs, Japan needs our gas to keep the lights on in Tokyo. I might go back to Mark in a second just to have a quick rebuttal or what the actual facts are on that. But at our recent Climate Integrity Summit, Yuki Tanabe came out from Japan to talk about how Japan absolutely does not need our gas, and they in fact export more gas out of Japan than what they import from Australia. And his post on Facebook got 90,000 as well. And this is someone who's not really known in Australia. He's not a Jackie Lambie that people will follow. He doesn't have a high social media following in Australia in and of himself. So for Yuki Tanabe to get 90,000 basically engagements across social media was also really high. So
this sounds like a real pile-on to me, Leanne. What you're saying is that, even some guy from Japan that no one's even heard of is far more popular than me. And to be clear, you're right. And this is really important. Like I started by saying, the leaders of major political parties are telling us that this is a cost of living election because both Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton would rather talk about this abstract thing called cost of living than talk about the specific concerns that millions of Australians have. And I think it's really important, Leanne, I didn't know all those numbers, I feel bad, that it's really important feedback that actually while we're being told by people we elect to Parliament what really matters, actually what we're hearing is that climate and energy issues are absolutely top of mind for a very large number of people. And I think whenever I tell people that Japan exports more gas than we sell to Japan, Japan doesn't have any gas of its own. Japan sells more gas to other countries than it buys from Australia. Yeah, most people are shocked to hear that. Similarly, when they hear that most of the gas we export was given away royalty-free, people are shocked to hear that. And while Peter Dutton hasn't said that bit out loud, even though it's true, and Anthony Albanese hasn't said that bit out loud, even though it's true, a real advantage for people doing this kind of work is it's cheaper to tell the truth. People are interested in this. People are shocked by this. And, when we can reach out to people with interesting facts that cut into the climate and energy debate and intersect with the so-called cost of living stuff, well, yeah, there's clearly a huge appetite for it. Far more interesting than my rants about supermarkets.
Well, let's got to be careful here because Richard's my boss, but a couple of other interesting statistics actually that I think are great for myth busting is that one of our most shared social media posts, we got 600 shares, which is a lot. That was from Mark talking about how the gas companies pay less in PRRT than I think Western Australian or Northern Territorians do in car rego, and also that the gas companies pay less in PRRT than kids pay in HEX. That got 600 shares. Now, usually people only share something if they like it. So it's safe we've done a little bit of a look through to see who has been sharing it and the comments that go with it. And we couldn't go through every, 600, but generally people won't share things that they disagree with unless it's something really out there like Trump being crazy. So we got almost 600 people. We used to think we can say confidently we got 590 shares from people who agreed with Mark. And get this, most of them were from Queensland. and most of them were from blokes. So when we're told that you can't talk about things other than cost of living, or you can't talk in Queensland about problems with the fossil fuel industry, I don't think that's right. Another data point that I found interesting was that we also got quite a lot of shares in Western Australia around gas. We're also told quite often that you can't talk about gas in Western Australia because too many people love it. And yet in the state election that was held a couple of weeks ago, an independent that ran on a climate ticket and is really opposed to gas, Kate, I can't remember her last name, Mark Wood, almost unseated a sitting ALP member from the seat of Fremantle. So what the data is telling us is a lot of the old myths, like you can't talk about climate in a cost of living election, you can't talk about fossil fuels in Queensland or Western Australia, just aren't playing out, at least through our channels. So, Mark, have you got anything that you want to add on to that or finish off with before I go to questions?
Yeah, just so one thing, one of the tricks that the gas industry uses is they always say, oh, Australia is a huge gas exporter, right? And so they make Australians feel like it's our thing and we're really big and all the rest of it. What people need to always remember is that a lot of gas is exported from Australia, but it's not Australians exporting it. It's a handful of big, overwhelmingly foreign-owned companies who are taking our gas and exporting it overseas and then telling us we've got a gas shortage. So I think it's just really important to remember that it's not that to always reinforce that it's not actually us. It's these big companies whose interests are not whose interests are actually in contradiction to the national interest, who are taking us for a ride, basically.
Leanne, I couldn't agree more. Can I just add something to that? So that even the concept and the phrasing of export revenues, they talk about export revenues a lot and Australia's export revenues a lot. And what that conjures up in people's heads is somehow it's kind of money for Australia. And then while they say export revenues a lot, they dog whistle on this one, but there's plenty of other people who say it for them. Having said export revenues a lot, the dog whistle or the sort of, their kind of patsies follow through is, yes, we need the export revenue to fund our, I don't know, cars or televisions or something. And these are very deep-seated concepts in Australians' minds, that somehow exporting gas gives us the export revenue we can use to buy televisions and cars with. And just choosing my words carefully here, as an economist, someone who's taught economics for 30 years, this is complete crap. All right. So to Mark's point, imagine the following. You've got 100% Japanese-owned gas project operating in Western Australia. It's 100% Japanese-owned. And we give it the gas for free because we're that kind of people. Some people think Australians aren't generous to foreigners, but we're very generous to foreign gas interests. So we've got a 100% Japanese-owned company. We're giving it gas for free, and it's exporting some gas to Japan. Okay, so how does that help Richard buy a television? How does this help Leanne buy a car? Where are these exports flowing? Where are they going? Now, to be clear, if the Japanese-owned gas company was paying a lot to the Australian government for the gas, then that money might go into government consolidated revenue and that money might be spent on our behalf. But that's not happening because we're giving them the gas for free. If that company was paying a lot of company tax or paying a lot of PRRT to the Commonwealth or state government, that might mean that the Commonwealth or state government had some money to spend on health or education or something else. But if they're not employing many people, they're not, and they're not paying much tax, they're not, then how much they export is just irrelevant for Mark or Richard or Leanne or anyone on this call. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics keeps track of how much they export. The Australian Bureau of Statistics records how much they export. Exports are included in our national accounts. Okay, wacko. But the idea that a 100% owned foreign company getting a resource for free, selling it to people in another country, is somehow helping me buy an import is absolute nonsense. But boy, and maybe there'll be some questions about this, but boy, that idea that somehow we need those exports to pay for our imports is just hardwired into a lot of Australians' brains. And choosing my words carefully, not true.
Can I just add one little, or maybe two very short anecdotes? So Impex, the big Japanese company that exports huge amounts of gas from the Northern Territory, has a huge influence on Australia's climate policy of all things, because they complain really, really loudly, whenever the government tries to bring in some weak, ineffective, climate measure. So Impex don't pay for any of that gas. They get it all for free. They don't pay petroleum resource rent tax. And on that project, which is that particular massive project in the Northern Territory, which is their main thing in Australia, they don't pay any corporate tax either. So they're getting the gas for free, not paying resource tax, and not paying any corporate tax.
Funding your lifestyle, Mark. Funding your lifestyle. Where would you be without them? Imagine if they paid negative tax. You're lucky they don't pay negative tax. Oh, actually, we subsidise them. Whoops.
I know, and exactly. And in Queensland, if you're a Queenslander, if you've paid any income tax at all, ever, you've paid more than all of the massive gas export projects have paid on gas they're exporting from Queensland ever. They haven't paid any, up to the latest ATO data that's available. They haven't paid any corporate tax.
And of course,
you go.
I was just going to remind people that in Australia, students are paying their HECS debts. Students are paying their HECS debts contributes more revenue to Commonwealth budget than the petroleum resource rent tax. So in Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry and give their kids free higher education. In Australia, we subsidise our fossil fuel industry and charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. This is why democracy matters, because our choices matter. The choices our countries make about what to tax and what to subsidise matter. We just happen to live in a country that's very generous to foreign oil companies, very generous. We might not like to give to the Pacific, but we love to give to Japan. We love to give to America. And we think it's a good idea to charge your kids a fortune to go to uni because, money doesn't grow on trees, kids.
I just wanted to recognise what a professional Mark was. He learnt 30 seconds ago that his main audience was in Queensland, and he's straight out of the gates. If you're in Queensland, I am going to go to questions now, and Mark is in his shed. So one of the questions that we've been getting is, where is Mark? Is Mark in his shed? Yes, he is. Mark's a professional artist as well as a gas expert. The first one I'm going to has been upvoted quite a bit, and it's a political question, and that's people wondering why the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, did not mention climate change at all in his budget speech. What is Optic's strategy of the ALP with climate? Do either of you want to take that?
Oh, look, I'll take a swing. Again, the objective, and this isn't a criticism, this is a description, the objective of the Labor Party is to win as many votes and seats as it can in the upcoming election. The objective of the Liberal Party is to win as many votes and as many seats as they can in the upcoming election. That's fine. These are professional politicians leading political parties. Never criticise someone for doing what it says on the box. In order for them to win as many votes as they can, they want to pick issues that they think help persuade people to vote for them. And they want to stay away from issues that they think will cost them votes. So that's why both major parties want to tell you it's a cost of living election, because Labor want to say, yep, it is a cost of living election, and look at the things we've got in mind to help with that. Here's a small tax cut. Here's an energy rebate. Yay, us, vote for us. And then the Liberals are like, this is a cost of living election. If you feel like prices have gone up faster than wages, they have, So it's a pretty smart thing to say. If you feel like prices have gone up faster than wages, you should blame Labor and vote for us. So just because those two parties have decided that that's the winning strategy for them to both focus on a narrow range of issues, doesn't mean they're the only issues that Australians care about. Certainly doesn't mean they're the only issues that matter in Australia. You know, if you were running a restaurant, you'd put a photo of your top selling product in your window to encourage people to come in. If you were doing an online retail store, you'd put your top selling item right up the front where it's easiest to find. This is just marketing from the major parties saying, if you're worried about this, vote for me, fine. But again, it's a democracy. We get to tell people what's important to us through the way we vote. They get to tell us what they think they're best at. We get to tell them what we think is most important. And these are radically different things. They don't have to intersect.
And I think, Richard, it's not just at the ballot box. I think this is what we're talking about today, that despite media and politicians telling us that people don't really care and haven't got the time to care about climate or nature, we're seeing something very different. And we can also, as individuals and organisations, help shape the narrative from now until the election. We can ask journalists to ask the good questions. We don't sit and go, oh, well, yes, you're right, it's a cost of living election, and we'll just let the marketeers in the major parties decide what we're going to talk about. Mark, did you have any perspectives on that, or will I just go to the next question?
I was just going to, very quickly, I was just going to say, the other reason they don't want to talk about climate change is it's a really awkward thing to talk about when you're approving massive new fossil fuel projects all the time that are adding billions of tons of emissions to the atmosphere. And
there is that.
So yeah.
And to be clear, absolutely. The smart political thing to do is to focus on the thing that you think people will like you for and avoid the thing people will hate you for. And because both major parties both support big expansion of Australia's enormous fossil fuel industry, neither of them really want to kind of double down on talking about climate. Imagine if Albo came out and said, this is a climate election, let's talk about climate change. Well, he would be open to so many hard questions that he just doesn't want to answer. So by saying this is a cost of living election, when someone says, why are you approving new gas and coal projects? He says, didn't I tell you it's a cost of living election? Why do you want to distract me from the important thing of talking about cost of living? But again, don't blame someone for doing what it says on the box. But that doesn't mean we have to buy that box.
This question's from Cherie McCammon, and it's got quite a lot of upvotes, and she would like a killer line from one of you about fossil fuel subsidies that gets around but our farmers need their diesel subsidies response.
Oh, we'll subsidise the farmers. Give them free diesel. Pay them to burn diesel. Like, it's a democracy, right? And what the fossil fuel industry are really good at doing is taking a popular industry hostage. All right. Yeah. So all the fossil fuel industry is doing is saying, sure, we get enormous subsidies, but someone you like gets a subsidy too. And therefore the Australia Institute hates the people you like. Well, it would be really easy if we wanted to say, all right, farmers can keep getting the diesel fuel rebate and the mining industry doesn't. Or no one can get more than $1 million a year from the diesel fuel rebate. So if someone wants to set up a tiny little mine, maybe they could get the diesel fuel rebate, or double the size of the diesel fuel rebate, give to the farmers. Like, it's a democracy, okay? We can do anything we want. But to say we have to keep giving the miners money because we give a little bit to farmers, well, that's clever politics, but it's unrelated to policy. It's unrelated to the Constitution, and it's unrelated to the climate challenge we face. So if you really want to subsidise farmers, you could do that. But also, like, of all the ways to subsidise farmers, of all the things we could do to help farmers, why cheap diesel? To be like, again, we just get stuck in our heads with the way things used to be done. And if you just want to shovel money onto farmers, well, shovel money onto farmers. We just spent $1.5 billion subsidising cash up front, $1.5 billion for the middle arm gas processing project in Darwin. I don't remember the last time we gave $1.5 billion cash in a region that wanted to expand farming. right? So if you want to help farmers, why do you want to help them through the medium of cheap diesel? Like, of all the ways to help farmers, why cheap diesel? But even if you want to give them cheap diesel, fine, give them cheap diesel.
Yeah. I remember trying to help farmers in Tasmania change the laws around how you share electricity so that it would be easier to have solar farms and have, a lot of the the dairy sheds are reliant on diesel, and a lot of the farmers down there started moving to solar. But of course, when we started to get into the regulatory knot, it's too hard, Leanne. No, I'm sorry. I mean, we want to help the farmers, but it's just a little bit too hard. But I love your idea, Richard, of saying let's just subsidise the farmers for everything. I mean, what a great thing to do. And I can't imagine how any of the political parties would push back on that one. It'd be a very interesting way to upend the conversation.
Subsidise their wage bill if you want.
This one's from Jacob Raw, and he'd like to know, how do we drive home to, well, he says political parties, but I think to everybody, that this cost of living crisis is actually driven by climate change, corporate greed and government spending. And then there's a few other suggestions in there, but I think I might just leave it at that for the question. How do we go about talking about the cost of living crisis in terms of climate change underpinning it?
Well, look, the cost of living crisis, to be clear, is not an economic term. Okay, so we have to be really careful. How do we fix the cost of living crisis? I don't know, give people wage rises. Okay, the reason that we have a cost of living crisis is that prices of stuff rose faster than wages. Profit share of GDP went up. Energy prices have gone up for a number of reasons. As I said before, insurance got more expensive. All sorts of things have got more expensive. So how do we fix the cost of living crisis? Well, there's no silver bullet because there's no one cause of it. But certainly, like in the middle of this election campaign, we're going to hear from the major parties what the major parties think should happen to the minimum wage. Right now, just to be clear, if you wanted to help poor people in a cost of living crisis, I don't know, increase their wages. Pretty unlikely the Liberals are going to recommend a significant increase in the minimum wage in Australia. Whether Labor push for an increase in the minimum wage that's equal to inflation, which would just mean they're treading water, or an increase in the minimum wage that's bigger than inflation, I don't know. We'll find out in the next couple of weeks. My guess will be they'll err on the side of a bit more generous. Good. So you have to be careful to think. So you're right, there's climate change is causing part of it. Climate change isn't causing all of it, but nothing's causing all of it. So I think the trick is to, or the trap is to think there's one thing we can do to fix a cost of living crisis, because there isn't one thing we can do to fix it, because there isn't one thing that caused it.
Sorry, Mark, you want to add something?
Oh, I totally agree with everything Richard said there. I would say just specifically on, I mean, climate change is costing Australians a lot of money, for instance, through higher insurance premiums, because we're all paying higher insurance premiums because of climate change, and a lot of people who are impacted pay a huge amount. And, I think, I mean, it's not specifically around the election, but I think, we really need to think about making the companies causing climate change, these massive coal and gas producers in Australia, making them pay for the costs we're paying. Because if we don't make them pay, we will, and the costs are absolutely massive. Houses, a lot of areas, houses are becoming uninsurable. Premiums are going through the roof, and the impact on insurance is just one thing. So I think we've really got to start thinking about ways we can make the people causing the problem pay the costs of their activities.
And on that, sorry, Leanne, one of my favourite lines on all this is, it doesn't matter if people believe in climate change or not, their insurance company does. So
Yeah.
we know that prices are going up. And to Mark's point, local councils really bear the burden of a lot of the damage of climate change. Local councils have to repair roads. Local councils have to repair local infrastructure that are increasingly being damaged by climate change. But local councils in Sydney have virtually no capacity to increase rate revenue without the only way they can get more revenue is to increase rates on the people that live in their local council area. So, you look at regions like Lismore, you look at the far north coast of New South Wales, you look at all these climate affected council areas. The climate change is being caused by the gas industry. A local council can't do anything to get revenue from the gas industry, so all it can do is jack up rates for residents. There is an obvious solution here, and I saw someone say it in the comments before, couldn't agree more. Scrap the fossil fuel subsidies, step one. You could spend $15 billion a year helping Australians and improve the environment at the same time. Or, as Mark said, we've got to start looking at climate change damage levies, particularly on fossil fuel exports. And maybe we can circulate our petition about that after this call. But yeah, we need to look at how to collect more revenue from the gas industry, not just because we shouldn't give our resources away for free, but because it's going to cost us a fortune to repair the damage and to protect ourselves from the damage that's yet to come.
Thanks, Richard. I think going back to your point, Richard, around there is no one thing that is pushing prices up or creating the cost of living crisis. But I think in the short to medium and definitely long term, you actually can't stabilise the economy if you don't stabilise the climate. There is a nexus there that will increasingly get worse if we don't address it. And I might just ask Hannah, if she can put a link in the comment section to the report that the Australia Institute did that looked at 3 ways that climate change is, climate change is fueling the cost of living crisis. We had a look at insurance, food and energy. And also maybe, Hannah, if you could put a link into the disaster levy petition that the Australia Institute's been running for quite a while, because Richard's 100% right. We don't have anything really. Well, we've got a very small adaptation fund with the federal government, but we do need a disaster levy because the impacts are going to keep growing, and it's not like, council coffers are going to increase exponentially in the way that the damage being caused by climate change is going to increase. So they'll be put in, if you don't see them in the chat, if Hannah doesn't put them in or you don't see them, you can just go to our website and have a look. They're pretty easy to find. This seems like an obvious question, but there's no obvious answer. So why is the government giving away our gas with no or minimum royalties? You're right, Tony Jones. It does seem crazy and dumb.
Mark, you want to go first, or I'm happy to have a swing?
Oh, yeah, power. They have the gas industry has a huge amount of power. And so it's a simple equation for politicians. Are they more scared of what the gas industry is going to do to them, or are they more scared of what the population will do? But I think the really interesting thing is here that other industries have power, like manufacturing employs 1 million people, right? Close enough in Australia. That's power. Australia can't really do without that. The iron ore industry actually pays quite a lot of royalties. It would be more difficult to do without that. But in the case of the gas industry, it's all smoke and mirrors, right? They're minuscule employers. They employ less than 0.25% of the workforce in Australia. They're not paying royalties. They're avoiding tax all the time. They're price gouging us for our own gas. So their power is relying on smoke and mirrors. It's like the Wizard of Oz, peddling hard behind the curtain to keep the whole facade up. So it's kind of a house of cards, and that's their weakness. Once people actually understand this, they lose a lot of power, and it'll be very hard for them to get our elected representatives to do what they want, because there'll be a clear incentive for our politicians to be seen to stand up to the gas industry.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is power. And, I've been talking about these issues, as has Mark and Leanne, for a long time, and I often get asked the why question. And the main why question, or the hardest why questions I get, are from people overseas. They go, okay, Richard, didn't know that you were the 3rd biggest fossil fuel industry exporter, didn't know your government didn't rely on that much for revenue, didn't know it was such a small employer. Okay, I've checked all the references you've sent me. You're right. Now I'm really confused why. So it's the right question. There's no simple answer, because in Australia, we don't talk about power. we don't talk about the fact, we love to talk about evidence-based policy, or we might even talk about, politicians being poll-driven. So we kind of have all these stories about how politicians make decisions, how our elected representatives make decisions, but we don't really talk much about power. But when I'm talking to people overseas, took me years to figure this out, but if I'm in America, I say, I don't know, why don't you guys stop selling machine guns to people? And they're like, oh, you don't understand how complicated it is and how powerful the National Rifle Association is. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's the fossil fuel industry in Australia. Or if I'm in Japan, it's like, I don't know, why don't you stop whaling? That seems like a dumb idea. Oh, you don't understand how important that, right? So every country does a dumb thing. All right, you've got to burn that into your head. Every country does a dumb thing. Democracy is not kind of wisdom just flowing upwards to optimal decision making, right? No one thinks that. But in Australia, we're always a bit shocked and surprised when we're confronted with our own idiocy in this regard. That's why it's such a hard question to answer. The answer is because the power of the gas industry is so great that politicians fear a foreign-owned gas industry that can't vote for them far more than it fears 15 million voters who can vote for them. That's the answer. Why do they fear the gas industry so much? That's actually a harder question that I don't really know the answer to, but I think Mark's close to it. It's a bit of a Wizard of Oz thing. And when both major parties have both agreed not to have a fight with the gas industry, neither of them want to be the first one to crack, because then the gas industry will just pick on one of them. That's why I think independents and minor parties are so much more likely to be brave on this and tell the truth about it, because they don't expect the gas industry to support them in the first place. So they're not giving anything up when they criticise it. But yeah, I think power is the short answer. But we don't like to talk about power in Australia. And when you read all of the analysis in all of the media of this election, you won't read many gallery journalists saying, well, the reason that we do this dumb thing is because of power. Power won't get a mention. We have freedom of speech in Australia, but people are free to ignore talking about it.
I think this is probably going to be our last question, so we'll have to keep it sort of short, but it's a follow-on from that, and a lot of people are asking it. That's one explanation why governments do that. But lately, and I've heard this as well, even the ABC talking about looming East Coast gas crisis without any analysis sitting underneath it or any mention of what we've been talking about today. Do either of you have an opinion or a take on why that happens?
Yeah, but Mark, do you want to go first?
No, you have a shot.
Centrism.
Yeah.
Centrism. The idea that truth must lie somewhere between what the government and opposition says. So if both the government and opposition are saying something, the ABC is like, oh, well, it would be crazy to say both major parties are ignoring the truth. So, yeah, the idea in Australia of centrism, which takes for granted that everything can be spread out across some left-right spectrum, that the positions that parties hold are based on principle or evidence, and in turn that to be a sensible commentator, one must find the sensible centre on everything. Yeah, fine. That's their job. Go ask them. But is it economically true that we have a shortage of gas? No. Is it scientifically true? No. Is there overwhelming public support for supporting the gas industry as is? No. But yeah, because I think the ABC locates itself between those two major parties, it's just inclined to do that. And also it doesn't want to get yelled at by the gas industry. It doesn't want to get yelled at by other media outlets, which is why it's so important that Dutton's come out and said we don't have a shortage, because all of a sudden there'll be people at the ABC running around going, how do I be centrist now? Dutton's to the left of Labor. Oh, the sky is falling for my simple worldview. And just to remind everyone, Angela Merkel, who was strong on climate in Europe for a long time in Germany, was a right-winger. It's a uniquely Australian phenomena to think that caring about climate change makes you progressive. Margaret Thatcher was talking about climate change forever ago.
Yes. Well, the Australia Institute is increasing its work in the space of in media and how we can help media be better. And the ABC is owned by all of us. So nothing, we can all call in or write in or email to the ABC and ask that they just do better than what they're currently doing. I think I'd do that. I don't know how much difference it makes as an individual, but it makes me feel better. And they probably, we need to fix the ABC and resource it more appropriately, I think, is one answer to that, because I think we do need our ABC to be having a more sophisticated analysis than what Richard's just explained, because if they don't, we may as well just all, we can just go to the commercial stations. We're going to have to wrap it up there because it's 5 to the hour. So I just wanted to, first of all, thank Richard and Mark. And I wanted to thank everybody for coming along today. We've got over 300 people joined this webinar. It was called very last minute. I think it was only, less than just over 24 hours ago that we decided that gas was really what we needed to talk about. As I mentioned at the start, we will be running these climate academies each Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Next week, we're going to have a Tasmanian special. What on earth is happening down there with the politics and the fish? It will be, the focus will be Tasmania, but I think the politics are nationwide. So I encourage anybody who's interested to join us for that. And the following week, I'll be talking to Amy Ramikis around doing a sort of a bit of a poll of the polls, a halfway mark through the election. Where are we at? And while I'm mentioning Amy, for anyone who hasn't been onto it, she's doing a fantastic live blog every day that the election's on, or at least Monday to Friday. And it's very informative and a lot more fun than some of the other blogs that I've dipped into. So you can catch all of our work by subscribing to the Australia Institute on YouTube. You can follow our podcasts, Follow the Money and After America. And if you do have a follow-up question for today or on anything, you can email us at australiainstitute.org.au. Oh, no, sorry, mail. I got that wrong. I thought that sounded wrong.
Seemed a bit short.
Yeah, that's right. You can mail us at mail@australiainstitute.org.au. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye, Richard. Bye, Mark.
Thanks, Leanne. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.